Good afternoon. My name's Mick Napier and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. These Sunday afternoons, not quite regular, but very frequent interviews and conversations with individuals we think has something very significant to say for Palestine solidarity. This afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome Chris Williamson MP. Chris, a big welcome to you in Derby, I think you are, yeah?
Yes, indeed I am, thanks Mick, although I'm no longer an MP. I lost my seat at the last election, but maybe be an MP again in the future.
Right, well, Chris was Labour MP for Derby, 2 shots at it. But after he spoke up on the issue of allegations of anti-Semitism against Jeremy Corbyn and numerous other Labour Party members, after blistering attacks on the Labour Party as irredeemably or institutionally anti-Semitic, Chris spoke up and suggested that it might be useful to discuss that reaction and whether it was justified or not. Chris, then the sky fell in. Then you were suspended. You want to tell your story? Because I think the detail is quite important for people.
Yeah, I mean, let me go back a little bit further than that, if I can, Nick, because I think it really started getting out of hand in 2016. There was the move against Jeremy Corbyn. The 172 members of the Parliamentary Labour Party signed the motion of no confidence in him. There was a new leadership election. There were then allegations of anti-Semitism, if you remember, at the Oxford University Labour Club. This led to an inquiry by Baroness Royal. She concluded that there was no evidence that the OULC was institutionally anti-Semitic. We saw the attack against Ken Livingstone and his suspension after he referenced the Havara agreement in a discussion on a radio program when he was asked about the issue of Nazi Germany. I mean, ironically, he was going on broadcasts to show solidarity with Nashar, who'd been accused of anti-Semitism for sharing a meme that had been drawn up by Norman Finkelstein, a prominent Jewish academic. And he found himself then in hot water. And yes, there were a number of things happened in 2016, and of course the Chakravarti review into anti-Semitism and other forms of racism in the Labour Party. And it was clearly, there was an hysterical outpouring, I think, because the anti-Semitism slurs had gained some traction in the attacks against Jeremy Corbyn. And I think that was partly because, you know, Jeremy, being the nice kind of guy that he is, was concerned that he may have said something or done something that might have hurt or offended people. And that was the last thing he wanted to do. And I think the tactical error that Jeremy made was to continue to apologise and give ground, as it were. I did make this point to Jeremy, and I mean, the point is that the people that were attacking Jeremy and attacking the party are unappeasable. You know, I mean, an appeasement's never worked in history when you look back over the period. But then I was elected then in 2017, and I got into a little bit of hot water in 2016. Actually, before I got re-elected to Parliament, because I lost my seat in 2015 and came back in 2017, when I made a fairly softball comment about anti-Semitism at the OULC, and I made the terrible misdemeanour, as some people portrayed it, of suggesting that, stating that I hoped that they wouldn't find any evidence of anti-Semitism in the OULC, and that was portrayed as being, beyond the pale, and I was attacked online and so on. And then I got elected to Parliament, and I made it my business to stand up for Jeremy and to support other people who've been falsely accused. And that's when they attacked
Come in there, Chris. You hoped that they wouldn't find any evidence of anti-Semitism. Well, you know, I hope they don't find any evidence of anti-Semitism in lots of places, but that would be good news. But it was spun as you saying something sinister. Have I got that right?
Absolutely it was, yes. And there was, as I say, I was subjected to, a pile on social media at the time. There were articles written about me saying I was a racist bigot and so on. This was before I was re-elected to Parliament. And that was merely for stating that, I hoped that they wouldn't find any evidence of anti-Semitism in the Oxford University Labour Club. And as it turned out, there wasn't any real evidence of anti-Semitism in the OULC. But when I got re-elected, I made it my business to defend people, because I think it's important when you have a platform as a member of parliament or any influential position that you use that to stand up for what you believe in, stand up for what you believe is right. And I just felt that being a member of parliament, it was important that I spoke out for people, spoke up for people who've been falsely accused. And many of the people that were being attacked as anti-Semites were people like Jackie Walker, who was, again, in 2016, targeted. She's a prominent black Jewish activist who was the vice chair of Momentum. And she was targeted. She's been expelled from the Labour Party now for allegedly bringing it into disrepute. It's an absolute disgrace, an outrage. And I made that very clear that I supported Jackie. I stood on platforms with Jackie. And when she was suspended, I said it was wrong that she'd been suspended and she should be reinstated. In fact, she, has got an important and big role to play, in my opinion, and still has in the Labour movement. And I said, what we need is people like Jackie Walker on the green benches in Parliament, speaking out for, important issues. I mean, look, Jackie is a prominent activist, as I say, who is a Jewish woman, who is an anti-Zionist. Many Jews are anti-Zionist. And, the Board of Deputies, the various other campaign groups that campaign against anti-Semitism, the Jewish Labour movement, etc., they are out Zionist organisations, and it's unconscionable for them that somebody like Jeremy Corbyn could come to power who was a prominent pro-Palestinian campaigner. And, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs made it their business to ensure that they, and still do, have influence on the political system in this country, including, obviously, in the Labour Party. And what they want to do is ensure that the supply chain of Labour MPs coming through are pro-Israel, are pro-Zionist. And the last thing they wanted was somebody coming in like Jeremy Corbyn and this new generation of people who were inspired by the message that Jeremy was promoting, coming through the ranks, as it were, and becoming MPs, because then they would lose influence.
So going forward, Chris, with this conversation, I want to get the maximum out of it when we've got you here. Generally speaking, with a very few exceptions, generally speaking, the accusations of anti-Semitism really meant silencing criticism of Israel. So when the word anti-Semitism was in everybody's newspapers and on the news, it really wasn't about anti-Semitism, was it? It was about criticism of Israel. And when, as you say, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs started to light their little fires around Britain against the Labour Party, they found many willing partners, didn't they? Tories, New Labour,
certainly
and so on.
They did. And, and it was a kind of a perfect storm in a way. I mean, there was real opposition to an ethical foreign policy that meant support for the Palestinian people and a demand that Israel complies with international law and so on. But of course, there were the neoliberal establishment figures in the corporate world who were keen to prevent a disturbance to the status quo, the media, and Jeremy's talk of the democratizing the media. And of course, the Zionist lobby were very influential. And, all the smears that Jeremy was subjected to, a whole host of ridiculous smears, including the one that he was anti-Semitic. But the anti-Semitism smear did gain traction, and it was used and it was built upon, and it just became insurmountable in the end. And I think the strategic error that Jeremy and his allies in his office, his advisors made, was in not actually standing up for his reputation, standing up for the Labour Party's reputation. And that was something that I continued to do, to defend Jeremy, to defend the Labour Party's reputation as a party that's always been an anti-racist party right through the ages, really. I mean, back to the Oswald Mosley's fascists, defending and standing up, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community back then, to the Anti-Nazi League, of which I was a member, and to see the party and see key figures like Jeremy being portrayed in that way was just appalled me. But in a way, worse was the attacks on, if you like, I've described the kind of Jeremy's Praetorian Guard, the grassroots activists who were smeared, grassroots activists who spend their life fighting bigotry and racism. Yeah. And we're tarnished in this way. And this has had a huge impact on a lot of people, had real impact on people's mental ill health, And but the people behind the smears, the people who have attacked people, they're incredibly ruthless. And it's almost as if they're not just satisfied with a political victory, as it were. I mean, they're still going after Jeremy now, and indeed others. and they want to crush completely people into the dirt. And I think we have to fight back. And that's one of the reasons I've set up a left legal fighting fund to try and level the playing field up a little bit to help grassroots activists, to support grassroots activists, so that they've got the wherewithal to use the legal system to challenge these smear merchants.
But Chris, it's becoming absurd. I mean, it was always sinister. It's thoroughly nasty. As you say, they're ruthless. Once they go after somebody, there's no mercy shown. But isn't it preposterous? I mean, one of the other guy I've interviewed in this series a long time ago was Tony Greenstein, who was expelled from the Labour Party. But not for racism, yeah. I believe it was for something called misconduct. And you also were charged with misconduct. But Tony published a thing in his blog which has stuck with me. It was a book about Republican dirty tricks, guys. People who give advice to regimes and to parties on how to win elections at all costs. And they said the ideal, one of them said, they're both Jewish, by the way, and they work often for anti-Semitic regimes from Hungary and so on. The ideal enemy that you need to create is one whom you can punch, but they cannot punch back. Now, you punched back, and that was proof that you were a bad guy.
Oh, yes, that was unconscionable. And I mean, there's a number of reasons why they went after me. I mean, I, as I say, refused to back down, refused to accept the narrative that, Labour was institutionally anti-Semitic. And, I always stood my ground in interviews with the likes of Nick Robinson and so on, who seemed to be obsessed with me for a period of time, was continually referencing me on social media and at public meetings. I mean, God knows why. I mean, I'm a nobody in reality, but I don't know, he seems to be some sort of obsession.
Sorry, Chris, I have to disagree. I have to disagree. Did you get 38 or 48 MPs calling for you to be 38? They don't do that for a nobody. Why did 38 of your comrades in Parliament initiate a call for you to be suspended or resuspended?
Well, it was worse than that, actually. I mean, that was the initial number, and there were many others who didn't sign that letter. But then there was a subsequent letter when I was reinstated, after it had been through due process in the, so-called due process in the party, if you can call it that, in the party's disciplinary structures, which are completely broken. But I was reinstated. And when I was reinstated in June last year, there were over 100 MPs who signed a motion to go to the next Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, calling for the whip to be withdrawn from me for a year and for an investigation to be mounted on how it was that I'd been reinstated. And then, there's such an outpouring, there's such an hysteria, on social media, in the mainstream media as well. And, basically the broken bureaucracy of the party crumbled, and they actually, frankly, the apparatchiks were keen to, keep me out, including the new regime under Jenny Formby, and she was sadly leading the charge, I regret to say, and she was somebody who I strongly supported. And ironically, in the charge sheet against me, it was one of the complaints were related to a meeting at which I'd spoken in support of a victim of this witch hunt, a prominent black rights activist called Mark Wadsworth, who spent his life fighting racism and was instrumental in the black section movement and very much involved in getting the first black MPs elected to Parliament. Indeed, he introduced Nelson Mandela to the Stephen Lawrence family, who he was a key supporter of and advisor to. And I was speaking at this meeting in support of him after he'd been expelled from the party following he'd been asking a question. That's all he did at the Chakrabarti review, and he called out Ruth Smith for collaborating with the Tory newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, at that meeting. And that was just a preamble to his general question, which was, and there was mainly Labour Party people there, and he was saying, look, if we're serious about tackling racism, and diversity, then, I'm paraphrasing what Mark said, but this is the sense of what it was. He said, we need to do better than we've done today. Look around this room. I'm the only black or brown face in the room. There was John Peenall there from the media, but apart from that, that was it. That was the point that Mark was making. And of course, this was blown up into something that it wasn't. And anyway, at this meeting in Liverpool, in Manchester, I'd spoken in support of Mark. And in that course of that speech, I was full of praise for Jenny Formby, who was due to be appointed. In fact, no, I think she had been recently appointed as a General Secretary. And I was ironically saying, I was confident that Jenny would get a hold of this hysteria that's going on at the moment, this whole crisis that's befallen the party in relation to anti-Semitism, and would put in place procedures and speed up the process and so on. In the end, unfortunately, Jenny went native and, if anything, actually intensified the witch hunt. I mean, there were more people, and people still are being suspended to this very day. Some are now being suspended, believe it or not, for having the temerity to express support for me. And this is absurd. I mean, what happened to freedom of speech? It's incredible, and it's so debilitating. I mean, and it was such a blow to me. Look, I gave 44 years of my life to the Labour Party. I was a dedicated activist. I mean, I went through thick and thin. I wasn't happy with the Blair regime, but I was a councillor in Derby at the time. I became leader of the council actually during that period of New Labour. And we were able to do things at the local level, and I kept my complaints about the leadership and the direction of travel, internally. I didn't sort of parade it in the national newspapers or the local newspapers in the way in which the right wing of the party did when Jeremy got elected. And me and my naivety hoped and expected that these right wingers in the party would do likewise. They would accept the democratic will of the membership. Let's remember that Jeremy, when he was elected, had the biggest mandate from the membership that any leader of any political party, let alone the Labour Party in this country, has ever achieved. You'd think that would give him some right to plot a course, as it were, which was overwhelmingly popular, but they weren't prepared to do that. And what is brought into sharp relief, I think, is the fact that our democracy, never mind the Labour Party, but our democracy is broken in this country. Representative democracy is not fit for purpose in Britain because the people that we've got in our parliament do not represent the interests of the people that elect them. They represent the interests of the corporate sector, the military-industrial complex. They represent, frankly, I mean, let's remember that in terms of the parliamentary Labour Party, I think it's around half, if not more than half, certainly when I was an MP, are members of the so-called Labour Friends of Israel.
Yep.
And this is something that, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, the Israeli, I mean, people might accuse me of being a conspiracy, but, all I would suggest is that they look at the Al Jazeera documentary, The Lobby, which details all this, and I had an undercover reporter, and it's all charted, it's all kind of, there for on the record, as it were. And they were very keen, and they make it, and in terms they say, they want to maintain, and again I'm paraphrasing, but they want to maintain, if you like, a supply chain of people coming through the ranks of the Labour Party into Parliament who are going to be sympathetic to the Israeli state, to the Israeli regime.
Well, Shai Massot, the guy who was whisked out of Britain as soon as that video was published, he said they were going to throw a casual million at Labour Friends of Israel.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That's right.
Serious money.
It was serious money, absolutely. And Mark Reger, the previous ambassador, Israeli ambassador to Britain. I mean, look, he was sent here to smash the BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanctions campaign, peaceful campaign to stand up for the Palestinian people, to address the whole question of the occupied territories, etc. And with that, even a peaceful campaign like that is unconscionable. We've seen Netanyahu saying it's morally reprehensible to that effect in the BDS campaign. Look, if the Israeli regime complied with international law and stopped the routine harassment, torture, imprisonment, and murder indeed of the Palestinian people, then there wouldn't be a BDS campaign. There wouldn't be a need for a BDS campaign. And frankly, people say we should acknowledge Israel's right to exist. Well, okay, it's there now, but in my opinion, and the more I've kind of looked into this, I mean, the talk of a two-state solution is a dead dog. It's just not tenable. I mean, the West Bank's been completely atomized. It's impossible, really, for a two-state solution to ever get off the ground. And now we know, obviously now Netanyahu is talking about annexing about a third of it in any event. I mean, to me, I think the only credible proposition going forward would be a one-state solution where there's equal rights for everybody, in a secular state. I mean, that's the way for me, I think, to go. But I mean, again, to suggest such things is seen as anathema and completely beyond the pale and somehow portrayed as anti-Semitism. But look, they use this anti-Semitism argument as an alternative, as a diversion to debating Zionism. And debating, what Zionism means. And in my opinion, Zionism, well, not in my opinion, I think it's a fact. It's a supremacist, racist ideology, and we need to call it out as such. In my opinion,
you're going to get complete agreement between us on that one. Chris, let me take you back a little bit and try and make a very simple case and see if you agree. the Israeli government is massively unpopular. I mean, the EU conducted a poll. Israel was absolutely despised and viewed with great suspicion by EU citizens. Franco Frattini, the EU Foreign Affairs spokesman, apologized to the State of Israel for the opinions of EU citizens, including Brits, and he promised that none of this would influence EU foreign policy. Isn't it essential for the Israelis, given that that's the case, isn't it essential that they've lost the debate, they have to shut it down? And what will the think tanks come up with in order to shut it down? You know, I think anti-Semitism is the only thing that they've got. But would you think it might just be the very last arrow in their quiver? And if we can stand up to this and come through, then we can get a real debate going on about the crimes that Israel's committing. Your thoughts?
I mean, look, I'm hopeful that maybe that, look, I guess to be a socialist, you have to be a dreamer, don't you? And always, expect and hope and work for the best, as it were. Massive forces always ranged against us. And, down through the ages, smeared, traduced, often, imprisoned, etc. I mean, that's not happened yet in this country. So who knows what might happen in the future. But no, I mean, I do feel that the future really is, and I've mentioned my sort of concern about the failure of representative democracy. And I mean, I've been working with others to try and build a new grassroots movement in this country to try and organise extra parliamentary action. And one of the things that we're very keen to stress as part of this movement is that we are an internationalist anti-imperialist movement. We're not a movement that will only focus on Britain. I think it's so important, I think, that we recognise liberation struggles around the world, and we have so much more in common, with working class struggles around the world than we've got with the elites who just happen to be British in that sense, as we are. So yeah, no, I do think that there is, and I think this is to some extent, well, to a great extent, frankly, with the advent of social media and the ability now of people to get information that was previously suppressed, was unavailable to them. I mean, look, I'm no different to many people. I'm just a working class bloke from Derby, worked in the building trade and so on, and I didn't know much about the Palestinian struggle. I mean, until relatively recently, I suppose, in my life, last sort of 10 or 15 years, you're kind of vaguely aware of it. And I suppose in many ways, I guess my sympathies are more with the Israelis, and after what happened in the Second World War, etc., and I think now that because people are more readily aware, and the injustice, oh my God, the injustice that is meted out to the Palestinian people and their dignity, it's so inspirational. It's so moving to see the tenacity, frankly, in the face of the adversity that the Palestinian people face, the way in which they have responded and so on. And I think that absolutely the battle of public opinion is important, and given that people can now get that information, as I say, from different sources now, and I think the Israelis are concerned about this, and I think certainly following some of the disgusting bombardments that we've seen that get to people in Gaza too, and I think they kind of recognise that they need to up their game because they were losing the battle, the public relations battle. And this is why we're seeing these troll farms and these smears being used. I mean, and I think it's fairly clear what it's about. It's about chilling solidarity with the Palestinian people. But I mean, as I've always said, and as an MP was very passionate about, and still am about this, but particularly so as an MP, to use your position, as I was saying earlier on, using that platform to demonstrate solidarity, to show solidarity. And I've got to say, very disappointed with colleagues, comrades who sat on the benches with me, who profess to be socialists, who have not spoken up. And look, if we don't speak out, then we're doomed. And the way that we have power as ordinary working people, as a movement, is by that collective solidarity, by standing together in unity. I mean, we trot out a lot of rhetoric, and some of the people who and I understand people are fearful who haven't spoken out, but it's no good, evoking the old Labour movement maxims about unity is strength and solidarity if you're not prepared to demonstrate that solidarity. And one of the things I've always said, that solidarity is an important attribute but it only really counts when it's difficult, not just when it's easy.
Yeah.
And you look at, people expressing solidarity in other parts of the world. I mean, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen to you in this country? Yeah, you'll get some adverse publicity. You might get dogpiled on social media, but you're not going to be hauled away and imprisoned. You're not going to be tortured. You're not going to be executed, as we see happen, and even now, to socialists in other parts of the world for expressing solidarity. And that's what inspires me. I mean, look at the sacrifice that, on a different issue, but I mean, look at the sacrifice that Julian Assange has made, to expose the abuse of corporate power, to expose the war crimes of the United States of America. He's languishing in Belmarsh prison, high security prison. I mean, it's a political prison. It's absolute disgrace. I know we're not here to speak about that today, but where are the parliamentary voices speaking out for Julian? Again, I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet or anything, but I was about the only MP that was regularly speaking up for Julian. I mean, God, this is just appalling. And so, I think that we can't just look to our parliamentary leaders. We have to look to each other. We have to look to each other for solidarity. And, that Labour movement maxim is absolutely apposite. Unity is strength. And one of the things I always used to say to people on the doorstep when I was canvassing, if they would make some, bigoted remarks about migrants and so on, is that, look, we have more in common, all of us as working class people, with migrants coming to this country than we've got with the people at the top of society, the 1% who are, exploiting us, are pulling the strings. We are a wealthy country. Nobody should be living in poverty. And the reason why migrants are often coming here is because of the imperialist wars that the very self-same people at the top of our society are profiteering from. That's what you need to be doing, I would say to people on the doorstep. And, lift your eyes above the horizon and look at who the real villains of the peace are. It's not migrants, It's the corporate world. It's the elites. It's the establishment. But our power comes from our unity, from our solidarity. And if we could just recognise the strength of that collective power, then we would be unstoppable. And we will win. We will prevail on behalf and for, and the Palestinian people will prevail and get justice ultimately. And we have to support them in their efforts to do that and be inspired by what they do on a daily basis.
I very much agree, Chris. We have to think about the people who are under the bombs that are made in Edinburgh or Glasgow or London or Derby or anywhere else. And that is international solidarity. But you can't stand up for anybody else if you can't stand up for yourself. And that means defending our rights to free speech. You said earlier it's becoming ridiculous, but you organised, you hosted a film showing in Westminster called Witch Hunt. And the people who moved against you have no sense of irony because they tried to shut it down. I mean, I'm reminded that many years ago, Noam Chomsky had written an article for the Index on Censorship. And some neocons from Washington got in touch with the Index on Censorship and asked them to pull the article. I mean, no sense of irony. So how central is this fight for free speech going to be going forward?
Oh, I think it's absolutely key. And I'm working with others, people like Jackie Walker, Tony Greenstein, who you mentioned you've had on your program. Mark Wadsworth actually is also involved in it. And we're trying to build a campaign for free speech. And I really do think it's so important that we fight for it, because it is under very, very significant threat, And unless we can win this battle, free speech is being closed down, and by doing that, it's closing down our ability to lend support to and give solidarity to Palestinian people, but also to other liberation struggles around the world, to give support to the Venezuelan people, for example, as well. And so, I think it is an absolutely, and it's amazing, in the 21st century, to think that we're having to refight this battle for free speech. It's unbelievable, almost, really, that we are in this situation, but we are. And both of the main political parties in England, anyway. I know the SNP is obviously dominant in Scotland, but they are establishment parties, and they are a major part of the problem. I mean, they are actually they are in the business of closing down free speech. We're seeing it happening, inside the Labour Party. We're seeing efforts to criminalise solidarity with the Palestinian people. This has been happening across Europe as well. Attempts to criminalise sort of pro-Palestinian activities. To criminalise the BDS campaign. We're seeing as a consequence of adopting the DHCR the IHRA, beg your pardon, recommendations by the Labour Party, the examples of anti-Semitism, so-called, have been used to shield free speech. They've been used to, not just within the Labour Party, but lots of local authorities who have adopted the IHRA examples have similarly used that to suppress support for the Palestinian people. I mean, it's been used to stop, BDS campaign activities going on. It was used to, I mean, I was a very active Palestine Solidarity group in Derby, and they were involved in the big ride for Palestine, and I think they were due to end this bicycle ride. I think it was last year in one of the local authorities. I can't remember which one it was. It might be Tower Hamlets, but I may be wrong. Maybe a different one. And anyway, the local authority where they were due to end their ride was supported back, as I understand it, the IHRA examples, and that was then used to say they couldn't have access to council facilities. I mean,
well, the council here in Edinburgh, cancelled a booking which I personally had made for Richard Falk, the UN Special Rapporteur at one time for the Palestinians, and he was due to talk about his book called Palestine: The Search for a Just Peace. The topic wasn't death to Zionism, it was the search for a just peace. And the Edinburgh City Council withdrew the booking because it was too controversial. How can it be too controversial to search for a just peace, Chris?
Well, it can't be. I mean, it isn't, is it? And this is part of the problem, that, it's... on the face of it, it's kind of dressed up as something. Oh, this is so important. We've taken a stand against bigotry and so on. But the truth is, it's being used in a very sinister way. And as I say, that's why I very strongly oppose the adoption by the party of the IHRA. But many of the Jewish members of the party also. I mean, it wasn't just me. I mean, lots of people were opposed to it. I think if they actually put it to the grassroots members of the party, it would never have got through. I mean, this is one of the things I was arguing for in 2018 during what we refer to as the Democracy Roadshow, where I was going around the country speaking about the importance of democracy in the party and giving members greater influence over policy, over the selection of candidates. And between elections, every sitting MP would have to go through a selection process, an endorsement process. I believe the SNP do that already, actually, so it's not that radical. I believe actually every democracy in the world have a similar system in place. But yeah, I mean, it's we're in very curious times, it seems to me, and I guess what we need to remember is that there are a lot of people who share our values, who share our worldview. And I think the key thing is it's kind of bringing people together on this point we made about solidarity.
Yes, there must be something very rotten in the Labour Party. I mean, not just normally, because where people fight in courtrooms, they tend to win. There was just a major victory in the European Court of Human Rights a month or so ago. French comrades went to the court because their free speech was being suppressed, campaigning in a very determined way for BDS. And the court really attacked the French government and said this was completely unconscionable. These people were exercising political rights to free speech, and the French government got a doing. Now, it seems to me, I don't want to take up too much time, but if you look right across the board, the UCU, ourselves up here in Scotland, whenever you go to court and fight, you win. There's very few exceptions to that, because there you've got the right to question your accusers. You find the accusations collapse or become preposterous. But in the Labour Party, the most preposterous accusations can carry, or they can say Chris Williamson's an anti-Semite. I tell him he's accused of being an anti-Semite. The Daily Express picks it up. Widespread accusations of anti-Semitism, and then it just goes on and on and on and on. There's no substance to it. So how come this witch hunt is so successful?
Well, because I think there is something wrong with essentially the Labour Party, and I mean, one of the things that I was obviously arguing for, as I say, was to try and, if you like, cleanse the party through democracy and by putting members in the driving seat. But the difficulty we have is that without that democratisation, we have a parliamentary Labour Party that's out of touch with the members and with the country as a whole. When you look at actually the wider programme, there's overwhelming support for the sort of direction of travel that the party wanted to take, or Jeremy Corbyn anyway wanted to take. You've got a problem really with the parliamentary Labour Party who are not representative and were doing their level best to undermine a Corbyn-led Labour government coming to power. The same thing applied, and we know this, we knew it anyway, but it's been confirmed now in writing with the report that was published, the leaked report that was published, it came to the public domain, not been published formally as it were, but anyway, it's in the public domain, that showed that there were people at the very centre of the party in the bureaucracy who were working against the interests of the party and were doing their level best to stop Labour winning the election in 2017. This is incredible. And, you know, even the National Executive Committee is not a representative body, or not a democratically representative body anyway. Only 25% of the seats on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party are elected by the members. The rest are appointed by a combination of the leader of the party, the leaders of the Scottish and Welsh parties, local authorities, the Labour in local government, they have a couple of representatives, I think, and then trade union general secretaries get to appoint people, but nobody else is elected to those. It's the parliamentary Labour Party, and they also send some people.
So all those Palestinian flags.
So that's the difficulty you've got. The system, the party structures are just not fit for purpose.
So all
and this is why.
Sorry, so those images that came from the last AGM or one before it, a sea of Palestinian flags flying at the Labour Party AGM, but that is hermetically sealed off from deliberations at the top of the party, where people who try to give voice to that feeling among the members get shut down and insulted and smeared.
Well, precisely, and of course, precisely. I mean, and you know, that one of the reasons, and one of the many reasons why I was targeted, because the campaign that I was arguing for, the democracy campaign, was gaining huge traction. There was massive, overwhelming support for it, and indeed, the 2018 conference, there was a vote, for example, in relation to the accountability of MPs, and around 90% of the constituency delegates supported that. And it was only defeated because, unfortunately, the trade union delegations voted it down. And I mean, they've not consulted their members on that. And in fact, the Unite voted against it. Had the Unite delegation voted for that change, it would have sailed through, and I think the course of history would have been different. But their own policy, again going back to 2016, I think it was, they had adopted a policy of open selections, mandatory selection for Labour MPs, but they voted against that. And so that's the difficulty you've got. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, I think grassroots members, although a lot of people have become very disillusioned with what's happened, and many people have left and are in the process of leaving the party, and because I think a lot of people feel that the leadership as we've got now, and certainly the parliamentary Labour Party, as we've already mentioned, and just the structures of the party are not representative of the views of its membership, and that's a real sadness. And I mean, I was always used to make the point that being an MP is not a job or a career; it's a privilege, and that it's the members who own the party, the members are the masters, and MPs and bureaucrats, they are the servants of the party. But the reality is, I was wrong. They are the masters.
Couple more questions.
They treat the members as just leafleting fodder, you know, at elections.
Yeah, a couple more questions, Chris. So Priti Patel went to Israel a couple of years ago. She was sacked by Theresa May. She wanted British humanitarian aid to be given to the Israeli army, and she came back, and Theresa May found that just a step too much. But look, now we got this Bullingdon boy Johnson as the Prime Minister, But with Sir Kier Starmer to you, does Johnson not have a majority of 500?
Well, I think he does. I mean, that's the real sadness. We've got two establishment parties now in Parliament, and that's why our democracy is not fit for purpose. People haven't really got a choice in this country's elections. It's a bit like the situation in the United States of America, where there's a very little difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. The same is true here. You know, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government gets in, as it were. And, you know, that was something that Jeremy Corbyn's election as Labour leader could have changed. And, you know, there was very powerful forces in the establishment, you know, in the media, the military-industrial complex, you know, people opposed to an ethical foreign policy, and they're not just in relation to Israel. I mean, because, you know, these arms manufacturers make huge profits out of turmoil and war around the world, don't they? And so it's not in their interests, as they see it, in strict monetary terms, for, you know, a permanent member of the UN Security Council to be promoting peace. I mean, you know, I have this kind of vision really of the British government exporting, you know, peace and harmony around the world instead of, you know, death and destruction, arms sales, wars. You know, it just shows you that, look, the people the people that we're taking on are incredibly powerful and incredibly ruthless, as we know. And I think those of us, you know, on the left, socialists, progressives, you know, we need a bit more of that steeliness that our opponents seem to display. You know, because unless we do that, then it's always going to be difficult, if not impossible, to prevail. But as I say, I think, you know, we've got a majority of people on our side. You know, the old Shelley poem is absolutely apposite. You know, we are many, they are few. You know, the mask of anarchy, and it's just about kind of getting people to recognise that. And one of the things I was really hopeful about as well, I mean, many things I was hopeful about with Jeremy's selection as leader, was the proposal to engage in community organising and to try and reach out and mobilise the communities that, you know, predominantly working class communities who've kind of tuned out of politics and democracy altogether because it's kind of passed them by. And this is what we're trying to do with this new movement that we're trying to create now. But as I say, we don't want it to be just focused upon, you know, issues, domestic issues, important though they are, of course. The whole idea is around, you know, raising political consciousness and raising expectations, but raising consciousness, not just about what's possible here, but raising consciousness about the injustices that are going on around the world and trying to draw parallels between the plight of people, you know, who are you know, the victims, if you like, of an unfair neoliberal system, you know, what's happening in other parts of the world, and try and kind of build that kind of international solidarity, which I think is so important. And you know, if we can achieve that, then that will be a major step. And you know, there may be a point in time will arrive where there is a feeling that there is a need for a new electoral vehicle to take those ideas into Parliament, because at the moment, regrettably, having spent 44 years in the party, I just can't see the Labour Party ever being that vehicle. It is an establishment party, and you know, it seems to me it's going the way of the Liberal Party, you know, the way the Liberal Party did, you know, around 100 years ago, where there was, you know, the duopoly between the Tories and the Liberals, and then the Labour came in, and I think there may be a case for a new vehicle to come forward. Whether we're there yet, I'm not sure.
So Jeremy Corbyn was never. Sorry, I interrupted you. Finish. No, I mean,
no, I'm just saying that we saw that in Scotland, of course. I mean, everybody thought that Labour would never lose in Scotland. You know, the sorts of stories about Red Clydeside, and you know, and it was a, you know, it was a socialist country, and you know, it was always going to be strongly Labour. Although back in the 50s, of course, I thought that was, you know, certainly less of the case. I think there's not as areas that, you know, did vote Tory back then. But I think part of the problem was that you know, Scotland had become a fiefdom for New Labour, and you know, and I think a lot of people just fell out of love with the Labour Party, really, and once they'd broken that habit, I suppose, of voting for the Labour Party, and people then started to quit. The scales, if you like, had fallen from their eyes, and people thought, well, no, we're not going to go along with that anymore, you know. And, so I mean, I just think, well, you know, anything's possible.
I think it was because I'm not a fan. The SNP is moving sharply to the right. But Alex Salmond was brought back from exile, where he had been kicked out by the SNP right wing, and he came back with a sort of social democratic programme.
Yes.
And the only difference I can see between Scotland and England is that there was a ready-made electoral alternative to Labour.
Yes.
And the contempt that people felt coming from these dinosaurs running the Labour Party up here was such that they gravitated towards the SNP, who made a change in order to accommodate the working class people in the Central Belt. Previously, they had been, when I was a kid, they were known as Tartan Tories, the SNP. So
I
they
was
had,
going to say, yes, yeah.
yeah, they had to change. I was going to ask you maybe a couple of final questions. Look, I mean, I wear a mask when I go into a shop. When I join a Labour Party, I think I have to put my muzzle on, don't I? I mean, you're not allowed to say what you want to say. Why the hell would you join a party? People join parties to amplify their own feelings, their own voices, what they want to say. But it's a muzzle at the door, isn't it? Is that essential, Chris? Because Jeremy Corbyn comes in, lifelong Palestine supporter, wants a decent health service, wants to do something about the disgusting inequalities and so on. Isn't that, and possibly challenge membership of NATO, possibly challenge nuclear weapons. That's too dangerous for our elites to allow, to be amenable to democratic change, isn't it?
Oh, most certainly so. I mean, and although Jeremy was sort of browbeaten into not pushing those issues as strongly as I think would have been his instinct to do in relation to, for example, what is NATO for now? I mean, why? Why are we in NATO? What's the point of it? Why have we got nuclear weapons? I mean, they're a moral anathema and they're appalling. And I mean, in my city where I live, I mean, as an MP, there were a number of people who worked on the Trident submarines. And so there's a bit of a constituency of support for that. But I think Jeremy addressed that when he talked about defence diversification, and I think that's really important. We need to put those to the fore. And I know it's easy with benefit of hindsight, although I think some people suggested this at the time, that the structures of the Labour Party, the former structures of the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, have already been mentioned, is not fit for purpose. And they were totally opposed, hostile to Jeremy. I used to go along to Parliamentary Labour parties, and it was, I mean, honestly, it was unbelievable. You wouldn't think these people on the same side, screaming and shouting at Jeremy and at me. I mean, in many ways, it's even more voluble. You couldn't hear yourself speak. I mean, the journalists were outside reporting on it. And I think Jeremy would have been better, frankly, if he'd have kind of appealed to the membership over the heads of the formal structures of the party.
It was his only hope.
I think so, because, and in the end, the people around Jeremy, I think, advised him that to indulge in, these parliamentary manoeuvres to try and, I guess they took a pragmatic view, I suppose, thinking that, we are where we are, we need to find a way of, working with the MPs that we've got. But to be honest with you, I think it was a forlorn proposition. They were never going to accept Jeremy. They were never going to accept a modest socialist program. They were never going to accept an ethical foreign policy that meant support for overt support for the Palestinian cause, and out and out an overt criticism of the Israeli state, the Israeli regime. And yeah, you're right. His only hope really would have been to appeal to the members. And now I just think that the party in some ways is potentially going through its death throes, and hopefully a new vehicle will emerge, because I just can't see how the Labour Party is ever going to be a vehicle. I mean, we had Jeremy Corbyn with the biggest mandate any political leader has ever had in this country, with an overwhelming mass party in his support, the biggest left of centre party anywhere in Western Europe, and we still didn't gain control of the party. It's incredible. And when Jeremy, for example, spoke out after that terrible Manchester Arena bombing during the 2017 election campaign, and there was a lot of pressure on him to come out with the usual lines, the usual kind of law and order lines. And he ignored that and came out and spoke to the zeitgeist, I think, when he said that we have to acknowledge the impact of Britain's foreign policy over the years leads us to these atrocities. And I think when Jeremy trusted his instincts like that, he spoke to a kind of, he struck a chord with the British people in that sense. And I just think, it'd have been far better to have sacked all his advisors, to be honest with you, and just kind of followed his instincts. And, I think we would have been in a much better place now. Yes, there would have been real turmoil in the Labour Party. The Labour Party may have imploded and collapsed and a new vehicle may have emerged, but that would have been a good thing. Because we'd have got shot of these characters who don't support socialism, who don't support, the kind of democracy, I think, that, most people in the party would like to see, or certainly then anyway, would like to see.
Just I've got a question here from Anthony. What scope is there for legal action to end the abusive process that you've been through by Labour Central Office? And because it's been used to prevent progressive members from gaining positions of influence. He's obviously hoping you've got a positive answer, do you?
Yes, I do. I mean, one of the things I've done as well as trying to create a new, it's a small acorn at the moment, a new grassroots movement, but giant oak trees, as we know, grow from small acorns, and I'm hopeful that we will get a giant oak tree, and in fact a forest of oak trees. But the other thing I did is to launch a left legal fighting fund, and this came about after I had taken the Labour Party to the High Court and won, after I was suspended, as we've spoken about earlier on in the programme, and then reinstated, and then because of the furore in the media and the hyperbole related to that, was then suspended again. And then we went to the High Court and got that decision ruled unlawful. However, the party was so determined, the bureaucrats, the apparatchiks, to prevent me coming back, they issued me with a third suspension with other manufactured allegations, as absurd as the one where you mentioned earlier about booking a room in the House of Commons to show the film Witch Hunt. And I won that case, and we were awarded costs, and so we'd actually managed to crowdfund for most of the costs, and grassroots members were incredibly supportive and generous and contributed to cover the legal costs, because I could never have taken it on my own. And we were awarded 100% of our costs, so we got 89,000 back from the party, put that into a fighting fund, and we've been sort of trying to gradually build that up. We've supported a range of different people to take action against the party after where people have been smeared by the party, witch hunted, but also to take on other players who have criticised people and libel actions against activists. So it's put people like Kerry Ann Mendoza. We're in the process of supporting, who's the editor of Canary, you probably know, there's this ridiculous action against her. So we supported Kerry Ann and Tom, and people can go on and check, if you Google Left Legal Fighting Fund, and you can see some of the cases that we have assisted people with. But we're trying to build this fund now. I'm in the process of a case against the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, who, as you know, are doing an inquiry into the Labour Party and alleged anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And they've named me in that report. I can't go into detail because of confidentiality, but I'm appalled and outraged that they've named me, and I'm demanding that they remove my name from it. And so we're taking legal action from the report, from the final report. And so we're taking legal action in that regard. And if they refuse to do so, then we'll end up in the courts. So long answer, but yes, there is scope. We've got a fund. We're trying to build it up. What we want to try and do is level the playing field a little bit, because we're in the process of lawfare. It was used very successfully against Lula da Silva, who I have a banner behind me, as you may be able to see there. All sorts of spurious allegations of corruption and all the rest of it that Lula da Silva was subjected to. Most popular politician in Brazil, and as you probably know, was arrested and imprisoned before the presidential elections last year, before that crypto-fascist Bolsonaro came to office. We're seeing a similar tactic here. They're trying to, they're using the legal system, and they know that the vast majority of, grassroots activists, ordinary grassroots members of the party and the wider movement are not wealthy people, and legal action is incredibly expensive. I've already said, in my case, 89,000 quid. Who can afford to pay that? I mean, you've got to be very well off to be able to, even an MP, on an MP side, you couldn't afford to take on cases like that. So we are trying to build a fund to level the playing field so that people who want to sustain the status quo, the neoliberals in this country, the people who oppose an ethical foreign policy, and who using anti-Semitism as a proxy, if you like, to free speech, we will be able to then take them on their own terms. And we'll use the courts, we'll use the capitalist courts against our enemies in the same way, and level up the playing field to assist ordinary grassroots members. And so we've got to ponder people can contribute to it if they've got any spare few bob, because that's how we build our fund, through small donations. We haven't got wealthy donors, but we've got lots of people. We've got solidarity, and if we can just spread the word, then yes, we can fight back.
And as you said earlier, Chris, that also has to involve grassroots activity outside representative structures, ordinary people getting involved,
yes,
as well as taking issues to court and the elected.
Yes, no, absolutely, of course. Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think this whole thing around raising political consciousness and doing, one of the things that we're focusing on in terms of the grassroots movement that we're trying to create, once the pandemic and the social distancing rules are eased sufficiently and it's safe to start mingling again, is to help to build community activities and practical solutions that things like helping people to create worker cooperatives, for example, community arts projects, to build the importance of the street protests, and to force local authorities to be doing a damn sight more than what they are doing. There are lots of powers available to the local authorities now, ironically made available to them by the Tories, but none of them are using those powers to stop the cuts, to build council houses, to deal with some of these challenges. But unfortunately, New Labour hollowed out local government in its entirety, particularly Labour in local government. The old days of municipal socialism, where there were some bastions of municipal socialism and a real bulwark against Thatcherism, just simply do not exist at the moment. But if we can empower communities by giving communities, people on the ground, grassroots people, the information about what's possible, what local authorities can do, then they can't have a wool pulled over their eyes so easily. And if the sitting councillors don't step up to the mark, don't step up to the plate, then I'm hoping that through this movement we can build new working class leaders, inspire and nurture new working class leaders, who will just cast them aside, and we'll put new people in who will actually represent the people that elect them. That's what you're supposed to be doing, isn't it? Represent the people that put you there. And I don't know, may call me old-fashioned or a dreamer or whatever, but I mean, that's always been my position. Even when I was leader of the council in Derby, my view was, my position, my job is to represent the people, to speak truth to power. I'm not there as a spokesperson or the bureaucracy for the local authority. And that is what elected members should be doing.
Well, on that dangerous and subversive note, I'll thank you, Chris Williamson, for coming on the show today, for joining the conversation, and thanks for your contribution. Much appreciated. Chris Williamson, ex-MP for Derby, committed now to building political structure outside the Labour Party that will take forward the ideas of ordinary people having power and deciding what happens in this country. Friends, a couple of quick announcements. Scottish PSC does a daily WhatsApp post called On This Day. It goes straight to your phone, and we put a lot of work into it, and we think it's informative, we think it's stimulating, and we think it helps people to understand Israel, Palestine, Zionism, and related topics. If you would like to receive that, just leave a message here, or my name's Mick, M-I-C-K, and if you send it to me, mick@scottishpsc.org.uk, I'll pass that on to the people who organise that. The two priorities we have are time to divest. We've already managed to get Falkirk Pension Fund to divest from Israeli bank Hapoalim. Tayside Pension Fund, including Dundee, have followed suit. Lothian Pension Fund are digging in, but we know they're under pressure, and if we get some support to add to that pressure, we could perhaps push that investment successes even further. Second campaign we're really committed to with partners in the UK and around the world is against the JNF, the Jewish National Fund. It's a racist pillar of Israeli apartheid. It might think short if I tell you that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown are two main sponsors of the JNF in the UK, so they're clearly up to no good. It's not just up to no good, they are involved actively in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and they enjoy charitable status here in the UK. If you want to get involved in working with Palestinians on whose land the JNF sits, who are denied access to their own property, sometimes their own homes, then join us in support of those Palestinians. Next week, I'll be in discussion with the Dr. Reverend Alistair Black, Baptist minister from Stirling. He's written on the history of Christian Zionism and Scotland's very substantial contribution to that ideology. It's something that will be of interest. It predates Jewish Zionism by almost a century. Most people don't know that. So join me next Sunday at 4 p.m. for a discussion with Alistair Black on Christian Zionism, the Scottish contribution. A big thanks again to Chris Williamson. Thanks, Chris, for joining us, and I'm sure our paths will cross repeatedly going forward. Thanks, Chris Williamson.
No worries, thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.